Hey everyone, today I'm narrating 9 true scary stories from middle of nowhere in Appalachia. But before we start, please make sure to like and subscribe. It really helps the channel and you can change your mind later. And if you've got any ideas for what the next video should be, feel free to drop them down in the comments. My cousin Mason and I had taken a week off in early January to clear out a piece of land his grandfather left him. It was way out in western North Carolina, deep enough into the hills that even Google Maps gave up. Mason had big plans for it. He talked about building a hunting camp, maybe putting up a small bunkhouse one day. But for now, the place had been sitting untouched for decades. His grandfather hadn't been out there since the 80s, and judging by the look of the structure, nobody else had either. We packed light but prepared: snowshoes, propane heater, canned food, some basic tools. The essentials. No electricity, no plumbing, and the cabin was too far gone to sleep in, so we set up camp in the bed of Mason's truck with a pile of thick wool blankets. The nights were brutally cold, but not unmanageable. During the day, we cut back overgrown saplings, dug out old trash, and tried to get a sense of what was salvageable. The first few days were uneventful. Just long stretches of silence broken by the occasional crack of a tree settling or the whine of wind through bare branches. No traffic, no voices, not even birds. It was that kind of quiet you only get far away from people still, but not peaceful exactly. Like everything had stopped holding its breath. Nights were colder, obviously. We'd hunker down in the truck bed around 9, zip up to our necks in layered sleeping bags, and tried to ignore the ache in our joints. The heater hissed quietly and popped sometimes when the metal cooled too fast. Mason snored. I usually stared at the ceiling of the camper shell, half listening to the wind until I eventually nodded off. Then came the 4th night. It was around 2 in the morning when Mason woke me up. He nudged me hard and whispered my name. I thought he just needed to pee or something, but then I saw his face. He looked off. Pale, eyes wider than they should have been. He said, real quiet, that someone was outside. I asked what he meant. He said he heard a voice, just one word, spoken once like a whisper. Not English. Not any language he recognized. At first, I figured he was sleep-talking, or maybe he'd been dreaming. The wind had been sharp all night, howling in that way that makes the trees moan. And I told him maybe it just sounded like a voice. But he kept shaking his head, not looking at me. That's what got me. He wasn't arguing, just stuck on whatever he thought he heard, so I sat up and got out of the truck. I walked around to the driver's side and stood still. No flashlight, just listened. It was freezing. My breath came out in short clouds, and my ears ached almost immediately. Everything around us was dead quiet, no rustling, no cracking branches. But then, just as I was about to give up and climb back in, I heard it too. It was faint, like someone speaking from far away, maybe a quarter mile down the trail we'd driven in on. Just one word, 2 syllables maybe. I couldn't place it. It wasn't a cry for help or someone shouting. It was soft, almost cautious, like someone saying it under their breath to hear how it sounded. We waited outside for a while, 15 minutes at least, but nothing else came. The next morning, we followed the trail for about a mile, checking for prints. Nothing but our own. No fresh tracks, no tire marks. Mason barely said anything the whole time. He kept glancing behind us like he expected something to be there. Eventually, we turned back. Neither of us wanted to admit it, but we were both a little rattled. Still, no harm done. We decided it was probably nothing, maybe an echo, or the wind twisting through the trees in just the wrong way. That sort of thing happens in the woods sometimes. That night, we moved the truck a bit farther into the clearing, just for peace of mind. Then, right at 3 in the morning, something tapped on the back window. Not a knock, not an accident, just a single, deliberate tap. Mason bolted upright so fast he cracked his head on the shell. He cursed, rubbed his forehead, and stared at me. I didn't say anything. I just listened. Nothing else. He reached under the seat and pulled out the pistol he kept stashed there. I slipped out of the truck, flashlight in one hand, my own pistol in the other. I circled the truck slowly, sweeping the beam across the snow. Nothing. No prints. No disturbed brush. No broken twigs. I crouched and looked under the truck. That's when I saw it. A piece of cloth faded blue, like denim, was caught on the rear bumper. It hadn't been there earlier. I'd walked past that bumper 10 times that day. So had Mason. We would have noticed it. He came out and took one look at it and swore out loud. It looked like part of a work shirt. No logos, no blood. Just a torn scrap of fabric, flapping a little in the wind. We stayed up till dawn. That morning was supposed to be our last. We packed up early and got ready to head out, but the truck wouldn't start. Battery was dead. Totally flat. No warning, no sign of drain. Connections were fine. We'd just driven it the day before. Mason didn't even hesitate. He said someone had done it on purpose. He suggested we split up. There was a service spot about 5 miles west, and he figured he could hike there, make a call, and be back before sundown. I wasn't crazy about the idea of splitting up, but we didn't want to leave our tools behind either. So I stayed. He left around 10 in the morning. By 4, he still wasn't back. By 6, the sun was starting to go, and I finally grabbed my pack and went after him. I followed his tracks through the snow, past the turn in the trail, up a narrow ridge. It took about an hour and a half to catch up. I found him standing still at the edge of a wide ravine, just standing there, staring down, not moving. I called his name, nothing. I walked up and touched his shoulder. He flinched like he'd forgotten I existed. Then he said, "It's still down there." I followed his gaze. Just snow and trees and ice. That's all I saw. He said he heard the voice again while passing that area, but closer this time. Said he stopped to listen, and that's when he saw something dark moving slowly across the ravine. Not fast, not stumbling, just steady, like it had a purpose. Then it stopped, and he couldn't see it anymore. We walked back together, fast and quiet. No one said anything. We didn't sleep that night either. The next morning, we flagged down a passing logging truck and got a ride into town. Never filed a report. What would we even say? There wasn't anything to prove. Mason sold the land 3 weeks later. Didn't even wait for a decent offer. He just wanted it gone. My cousin Darren had left me the keys to his hunting cabin out near the Kentucky-Virginia border. He was stationed overseas at the time, and the cabin had been sitting empty for almost a year. He asked if I could check on it, fix a broken window, drain the pipes before the freeze set in, make sure the roof was still intact. It was early December, one of those weeks where the cold doesn't punch you in the face but sinks into your clothes until you can't remember what warmth feels like. The roads were still mostly clear though. I packed a sleeping bag, a few supplies, my toolbox, and some dog food, and headed out early in the morning. The first few hours were easy enough. Interstate, gas stations, podcasts. Once I got off the main road though, things got real empty, real fast. By the time I saw the gravel road that led to the cabin, my gas tank was a quarter full, and my fingers had that weird numb feeling from gripping the wheel too tight. The turnoff wasn't marked. Just a break in the trees and a rutted path veering off into the hills. I almost missed it. It looked like something that had been forgotten for a decade. The cabin sat maybe 100 yards off the road, tucked back behind a thin wall of trees, with a narrow stream frozen solid nearby. There was no driveway, just packed down snow leading to a clearing where I parked. No lights, no mailbox, just wood and frost and silence. Remy jumped out of the car, stretched, then froze. She stood there staring at the cabin, ears forward, tail stiff. I called her a couple times, and she didn't even flinch, just this low, uneasy growl in her throat. I thought maybe she smelled an animal or something. I grabbed the bag, clipped her leash, and walked up to the front door. The lock was stubborn with cold, but it finally gave. The air inside was sharp, dry, and stale, like dust and pine needles that had been trapped too long. There wasn't much to it, just a single room with a rusted wood stove, a beat-up mattress, and a tiny kitchen that looked like no one had cooked in it since the 90s. Remy refused to go in. She stood at the doorway, whining. Not barking, just this low, insistent whine with her tail between her legs. I gave her a little tug, then picked her up when she wouldn't move. She squirmed the whole time I carried her over the threshold. The second I set her down, she bolted to the far corner and stayed there, staring at the back wall like she was waiting for something to happen. That first night was rough. I got the fire going, which helped, but the heat didn't carry far. I kept my jacket on and slept on top of my sleeping bag instead of in it. I could hear coyotes outside, nothing unusual. Remy paced a little, then settled under the table, still watching that same spot by the wall. Around midnight, I heard something else. Footsteps, not inside, outside, behind the cabin. Just slow, deliberate crunches in the snow. Not animal-like, not scampering. These were paced. Human. I froze. The fire crackled loud in the silence, so I turned the lantern off and moved to the window. The slats didn't give me much of a view, but I watched for a long time, heart doing that slow, heavy thump, like it was syncing up with every sound I couldn't quite hear. Nothing moved, just trees. But every time I stepped away from the window, Remy started growling again. Quiet, low, but constant. In the morning, I went around back, still telling myself it was probably nothing, just nerves. Cabin creaks. Animal sounds that my brain turned into footsteps. But there they were, prints. One set. Big, deep boot prints that started at the tree line and stopped just short of the back wall. No return trail. Just a straight line from the woods to the window, and then nothing. I remember pulling out my phone and taking pictures. I zoomed in, made sure they were clear, even took one with my boot next to the prints for scale. I figured I'd show Darren later, maybe joke about his creepy woods neighbors. That night, I went to look at the photos again. Gone. Every one of them. The folder was empty. Not corrupted, not glitched, just gone. I checked the cloud, the gallery, even searched by date. Nothing. I sat there staring at the screen, trying to remember if I'd actually hit save, if maybe I'd hit delete by accident. But I know I didn't. I slept even less that night. Kept the fire up, kept the rifle nearby. Remy stayed close, her head on my thigh, ears twitching with every sound. Around sunset, I heard the steps again. Same as before. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Slow and steady, circling the cabin. I didn't check the window this time. I didn't want to know. Then it stopped. For almost an hour, there was nothing. Just the fire and my own breathing and the occasional creak from the cabin shifting in the cold. Then someone knocked, not on the door, on the wall. 3 slow, hollow thuds. I didn't move. I didn't speak. Remy pressed harder against my leg, her body stiff. We just sat there waiting. I don't know what for. Eventually, I got up the nerve to open the door and shine the flashlight out. No one, but the prints were back. All around the porch and along the side of the cabin, bare feet, not boot prints. Bare human feet in the snow, at least a dozen of them, all the same length, like the same person had walked in circles around the place. I shoved the mattress up against the door, kept the rifle in my lap, and sat there until the fire started to die. Around 3 in the morning, Remy started growling again. This time it was sharper, more like a warning than fear. And then I heard it. Inside, one step, then another. Slow, deliberate, across the floor behind the stove. I didn't breathe. Just kept my eyes on the back corner, where the firelight didn't reach. I couldn't see anything. I should have seen someone standing there, but there was nothing. I stood up, rifle raised, and took a few steps toward the back. No one. But when I turned around, the front door was wide open. No creak, no cold gust, no sound. Just open. I closed it, locked it, shoved the mattress back. Didn't sleep the rest of the night. At first light, I packed everything. Didn't bother cleaning, just tossed my stuff in the car. Remy jumped in like she'd been waiting for the signal. The roads were worse going out, slick with a thin layer of ice. I almost slid into a ditch twice, but I didn't care. I just wanted distance. When I finally made it home, I plugged in my phone and checked the gallery again. Still empty. Except for one photo. It was taken from the back corner of the cabin. Low angle. like someone crouching, and in the center of the frame me, lying on my side by the stove, fast asleep. I don't remember setting the phone down. I don't remember anyone else being there. But the timestamp matched the first night. I deleted the photo, sold the rifle the next day, and mailed Darren the keys. At the time, I was working contract jobs, mostly inspection gigs for telecom companies, checking up on cell tower sites in remote areas. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid decently and gave me the kind of solitude I didn't mind. A subcontractor I'd worked with a couple of times before called me up with a short-term assignment. They gave me a spreadsheet of coordinates, printed logs to cross-check, and a rough schedule to follow. Most of the towers were crammed into odd spots, wedged into the backs of steep ridges, hidden in frost-covered clearings, sometimes only reachable by gravel roads or fire trails. The last site on my list was supposed to be a repeater unit a few miles past a seasonal road just outside Elkins, West Virginia. I'd never been there before. Honestly, I wasn't even sure there was a proper road on the satellite view, just a pale line cutting through woods, then fading into snowdrifts. The company told me a snowplow had gone through the previous weekend, clearing enough to get close. It was late January, and light was already fading by the time I turned off the main road in a rented pickup with chains on the tires. The drive-in was tense, narrow, no shoulder, snow packed hard against the sides like frozen walls. No guardrails, no pull-offs, just trees, snow, and that gray-blue twilight that settles in way too fast in the mountains. Eventually, the tower came into view, barely sticking up through the tree line. At its base was a portable trailer unit, one of those prefab office types you see at construction sites, balanced unevenly on concrete blocks. There was a generator off to the side humming steadily, and a faint stream of heat pushing out from a vent near the back. Standard setup. I'd seen dozens like it. I pulled in, parked just off the access strip, and stepped out into ankle-deep snow, cold enough that the air stung a little in my nose. Inside, the trailer smelled like old plastic and dust. Not unpleasant, just stale. The heater kicked in with a dry buzz the second I closed the door behind me. The interior was basic: metal desk, a wall of routers and power units, a fire extinguisher that had expired sometime before the pandemic, and 3 large filing cabinets bolted to the floor. My checklist was simple. Verify the physical logs matched the digital records. Check the emergency supplies, confirm the date on the station tag, and sign off. Maybe 20 minutes of work, tops. I started with the cabinets. Each one held binders with laminated log sheets, weatherproof, time-stamped, dull as cardboard. The first 2 cabinets were routine, just the usual tower usage logs, technician sign-offs, and equipment checklists. Then I opened the third. Right on top was a red folder. It didn't match the others. No binder, no protective sleeve. Just a cheap folder with a crooked label taped to the front, review pending, station 4K17. Except this wasn't that station. This was station 209. It was printed right on the entryway door and matched what was on my forms. There shouldn't have been anything in this trailer for another station, let alone a folder labeled like it was still under audit. I opened it out of curiosity. Inside were sheets of paper, same layout, same format as the rest, but something felt off. The dates weren't in order. One page was dated December 16th, another January 3rd, then one jumped back to November 28th. Not a single entry followed any kind of logical progression, like someone had just shuffled them and thrown them in. Then I saw my name. It was on one of the forms, printed, signed, time-stamped. Not just that, though. The signature looked exactly like mine. Same angle, same pressure on the downstrokes, even the slight hook on the J I'd done since high school. It was uncanny. The timestamp said I'd signed it 2 weeks ago, but I'd been in North Carolina 2 weeks ago, checking on a mountaintop site near Asheville. I remember the icy switchbacks, the wind that wouldn't quit, and almost losing my lunch climbing back down a frozen ridge. I even checked my phone's GPS history just to be sure. Yeah, there was no way I'd been near Elkins. Still, the form had my name, my signature, and a task completed exactly the way I'd have done it. The checklist was even in my preferred sequence. It was like someone had copied not just my handwriting, but my habits. I set the red folder aside and opened the equipment panel that cross-referenced the logs. Digitally, everything looked fine. Entries were clean, timestamps aligned, no discrepancies, no mention of Station 4K17 anywhere. Just a tidy, boring record of tower activity. When I looked back at the folder, something was gnawing at me. I grabbed my phone and took a picture of the page with the strange signature. But when I checked the photo, the entry looked completely normal. Date aligned. No weird jumps. The form looked like any other. Took another photo. Same thing. But when I looked at the actual paper, it was still wrong. My name. Wrong date. That's when the heater cut out again. Not loudly, just a slow fade to silence. The air didn't exactly get cold, but it felt heavier. The kind of shift that makes you sit up and check the corners of a room for no reason. I turned back toward the cabinet. The red folder was gone. I checked the desk. Empty. Looked behind the crate stacked by the exit, under the chair, even on top of the equipment panel. Nothing. Then I opened the drawer again. There it was. Right where it had been before. Like it hadn't moved at all. I locked the drawer, muttered something about losing daylight, and went to finish the checklist. Just wanted to get it done and get out. I signed the station log and turned to grab my bag, and the heater was back on. But the drawer I'd just locked, hanging open again, folder out on the desk, open to a page I hadn't seen yet. My name, today's date, the task, finalize archive record, remain on site. Nope. I took another photo. The screen showed a blank page. No writing, just empty lines. I slammed the drawer shut hard enough that the cabinet shook. Used a zip tie from my kit to secure the latch. Then I headed for the door. The handle wouldn't turn. It wasn't frozen, I checked. It moved a bit, then locked up like something inside was jamming it. I leaned into it, twisted hard. It gave a little. The generator outside buzzed louder. Overhead lights flickered once, then held steady. Then I heard paper, not falling, fluttering. Like loose pages shifting just slightly behind me. I turned around. The red folder was back on the floor. Pages fanned out again. The drawer open. And this time, the filing cabinet had shifted forward about 6 inches. It was now partially covering the heater panel. I hadn't heard a thing. That thing had bolts through the floor and still managed to slide across the linoleum without a sound. I jammed the pages back inside, shoved the folder deep into the drawer, and shoved a crate in front of it. Then I opened the back panel on the heater and cut power at the breaker. Emergency radio? Dead. Phone? No reception. It had 1 bar earlier. Now it was just searching. I wasn't sleeping there. I grabbed my bag, tried the door again, and this time it swung open with no resistance. Outside was dead quiet, just wind across the snow. I stepped out, boots crunching into the icy crust, and turned for one last look through the trailer window. Lights were off, but the folder was sitting right there, on the desk again, centered, closed, lit by the red glow of the emergency strip light. I didn't go back. I drove until I hit pavement and kept going until I saw a gas station near Bellington with lights on. Slept in the truck, engine idling. The next morning, I called the subcontractor, told them I couldn't finish the Elkins site. Said the road in was too unstable. They didn't push. Probably just assumed I'd bailed early because of the snow. My Uncle Nate had this cabin way out in the Appalachian Mountains. I'd only been there twice before, both times in summer when the woods felt alive and the worst thing that could happen was mosquito bites or Nate burning the eggs. That winter trip was different. It was the first time I'd ever seen that place with snow on the ground and the last time I ever went near it. It was just me and him. My parents were going through a divorce and had pawned me off for the week. Nate showed up in his old Chevy mud-caked, dented door, smelled like diesel and jerky. He barely said a word, just nodded at me, helped toss my bag in the bed, and handed me a bag of sunflower seeds for the ride. The drive took almost 6 hours. We stopped once, out near some bend in the road with a hand-painted sign that said, "Spring Water." He filled up 2 old milk jugs while I kicked at the snow. We didn't have much of a plan. He just said we'd try ice fishing on the lake, maybe hike a bit if the snow didn't get too bad. Said we'd be back before school started again. That was pretty much it. The cabin sat up on a ridge, hidden behind layers of pine trees so thick it felt like you were walking through a tunnel to get there. By the time we pulled up, the sun was low and the temperature had dropped hard. Snow was already deep enough to swallow my boots, and more was definitely coming. The sky had that weird pressure to it, like a held breath. It was completely silent, no birds, no wind, just that eerie kind of still where even the trees seemed to pause. Inside, it wasn't much warmer. Nate got a fire going in the stove, dumped some canned beans into a dented pot, and rolled out our sleeping bags, mine on the cot, his on the floor like always. The place had one lantern that worked when it wanted to and a little hand crank radio that mostly just picked up static, though sometimes you could catch weather alerts if you got the angle just right. That night, I couldn't sleep. Nate was out cold, snoring into the floorboards, while I lay staring up at the rafters, wrapped in my bag with my breath fogging in the air above me. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, and every board in the place seemed to creak with the cold. At first, it was the usual cabin noises, wood contracting, wind slipping through cracks, but then it changed. The creaks became longer, stretched out like slow breaths, rhythmic, repeating. I thought maybe it was the wind messing with the trees, but it wasn't outside, it was underneath. I sat up slowly. The floor felt too cold, like it was leaking cold from beneath. The cabin sat up on beams, with a crawl space under it. Nate had chucked a load of firewood down there earlier, told me it helped keep it dry and off the frozen ground. The sound stopped as soon as I moved. I waited, ears straining. Nothing. Tried to tell myself it was probably an animal, raccoon, maybe a possum. That's all it could be, right? Still, I didn't get up, didn't grab the flashlight. I just rolled over, pulled the bag tighter, and stared at the wall until I somehow drifted off. Next night, I woke up colder. The fire was completely out, stove cold to the touch. My toes were numb and my breath felt like smoke in the air. Nate was still out, arm tossed over his face, mouth open. I climbed out of the bag, grabbed the flashlight, and figured I'd add some wood to the stove. There was an outside hatch under the porch where Nate kept the big pile of logs, but there was also this smaller panel behind the stove, an indoor access to the crawl space. I'd seen it, but never thought much of it. I got curious, maybe dumb curious, in that kid way where you don't fully think things through. I knelt down, unlatched the hatch, and pulled it open. The cold that hit me was different. It was sharper than anything else in the room, made my eyes water. And the smell, God, it was weird, like wet dirt mixed with something sour, almost like mulch that had gone slimy. I leaned in with the flashlight. At first, nothing, just dirt floor, wooden beams, and some logs stacked against the wall. The beam flickered a little, probably just the battery. I reached down to grab a piece of wood, and something moved. It didn't scurry, it didn't make a sound. It just lifted up, slowly. At first, I thought it was my shadow. Then I thought maybe the beam had caught a pile of wood in a weird way. But no, the shape kept rising. It was tall. Way taller than any person should be, and it had to hunch to stay under the floorboards. The light didn't seem to land on it properly. I could see the outline, kind of, but not the inside. It was like looking at a person-shaped hole in the world. It didn't move toward me. It didn't speak. It just stood there, then tilted its head to the side, like a dog trying to understand something, or a tree branch sagging under weight. That's when I dropped the hatch. It slammed shut, and I fell back, hitting the stove hard enough to rattle the pot on top. Nate stirred but didn't wake, just grunted and rolled over. I didn't go back to the bag. I didn't move at all. I sat there the rest of the night, flashlight aimed at the hatch, arms wrapped tight around my knees. Next morning, Nate acted normal. Complained about the fire being out and told me to help him clear the trail to the stream. I couldn't even look at the hatch. Couldn't look at him either. I barely touched my food. That night, I didn't sleep. Sat up with the flashlight in my lap, still wrapped in the bag. Nate told me to leave the hatch cracked, said the crawl space needed to vent or the wood would sweat. I wanted to argue. I didn't, I just nodded. Around 2 a.m. the creaking started again, but this time it wasn't underneath. It was right behind the stove. It wasn't footsteps, not exactly. It was like pressure, like something was slowly pressing its weight into the wood from the other side. I whispered Nate's name. Nothing. The sound stopped. Then I saw it. Fingers. Or not quite fingers. The shape of them. 4 dark outlines pushing up through the slats in the hatch. Not flesh. Not even shadows, really. More like impressions. Like something was thinking about having hands. I couldn't breathe. My chest locked up. Like the cold had frozen my lungs. The air in the room changed. All the warmth vanished. Even the lantern flame dipped low, like it was trying to hide. The hatch started to open. Just a few inches. I snapped the flashlight up. Nothing. But the space behind it wasn't empty anymore. The air shimmered, but not like heat. More like water rippling backward. It didn't look real. It looked like a hole trying to hold itself together. Then it rose, taller than before. Its head slipped through the opening, into the cabin. The ceiling should have stopped it, but somehow it just kept coming. The light hit its face, or where a face should have been, and vanished, like shining a beam into a black sheet. I tried to scream. Couldn't. Then Nate sat up. No warning. No sound, just up, like someone pulled a string in his back. He grabbed the hatchet from by the door and hurled it without a word. It hit the beam beside the hatch with a thud. Whatever was there dropped, fast, like it got yanked. The hatch slammed shut. We didn't say anything. We didn't sleep. And Nate started packing as soon as the sky began to lighten. We left half our food, the fishing gear, everything. He drove straight until we hit a gas station off I-67, called someone from a payphone, said something in a low voice I couldn't hear. Then we got back in the truck and drove the rest of the way in silence. We never went back. I was 32 when I agreed to look after my cousin Caleb's cabin for 5 nights while he went to visit his in-laws down in Louisiana. I didn't really think it through. He caught me at the right moment between jobs, feeling like I owed him, and honestly just kind of burned out from people in general. Caleb's always been good to me. A couple years ago, I was late on rent for 3 months straight, and he covered it without asking for a payback schedule. Just said, "You'll get me back sometime." So when he asked if I could sit his cabin for a few days, just make sure the pipes didn't freeze, nothing got into the food, no squatters wandered in, I said yes. I shouldn't have. His place is up near Tellico Ridge, tucked so deep in western North Carolina that GPS gets confused. You drive 15 minutes past the last gas station, turn onto a gravel road that slowly turns into packed dirt, and then bounce along 5 miles of what barely qualifies as a trail. No cell service. No neighbors. Just trees and snow, especially in December. I didn't mind the idea at first. I thought I could use the quiet. Caleb left me with a snowmobile, a couple of diesel jugs for the generator, and a yellow legal pad with a short list of things to keep an eye on. The shed needed to stay locked, he said. Coyotes figured out how to paw at the latch last winter. The food bins on the porch were triple secured with clips, and the pipes had to be run twice a day to keep from freezing. He handed me the keys and told me, casually, "The first 2 days are easy. It's after that you start noticing weird stuff." I thought he was joking. Caleb has a dry way of messing with people. He once convinced a guy that his woodshed was on an old Civil War graveyard just to see if he'd keep coming to poker night. So I shrugged it off. The first couple days were fine. Cold, definitely, but I stayed busy. I brought a bunch of books, a thermos the size of a toddler, and a dozen frozen burritos. The satellite radio he had was old and only picked up about 3 stations, but I didn't mind the static and weird late-night conspiracy shows. I actually kind of liked the stillness. Just snow outside, wood crackling inside, and time passing real slow. Then came the 3rd night. I'd gone to bed around midnight. The fire was dying down, and the generator buzzed faintly through the floorboards. I remember I was half asleep when I heard a crunch. Just once, like ice cracking under pressure. I stayed still, listening. Then came a second sound, something like a weight shifting across the roof, or maybe a heavy branch letting go. Not loud, just enough to register. I waited for the wind to pick up again, thinking it would blend into the background and I could fall asleep. But it didn't. The generator kept humming, and the silence stretched long. In the morning, I found the shed door wide open. That made no sense. Caleb's rigged it with a double latch and a bar because of the bears, he told me. Don't mess with the locking system, he said. It's overkill for everything except bears. But there it was, both latches dangling, the bar leaning off to the side. Nothing missing that I could see. Shovel, fuel, old camping stove, a rusted tackle box. But just outside the threshold, in the fresh snow, I spotted a faint trail. It wasn't prints, more like drag marks. Thin, shallow, a kind of arc shape that moved away from the shed door, curled around the corner of the cabin, then stopped. Just stopped. No return trail. No deepening of the tracks where something might have turned. It was like whatever made them move forward and then disappeared. I walked the whole perimeter, trying to see if there were more. The snow had started falling again, soft and steady, and I figured whatever left the trail had probably been covered overnight. Still, I couldn't shake how clean the cutoff was. That night, I went to bed later. I'd been jumpy all day and told myself I was being ridiculous. I was alone in the woods, far from town, with too much time to think. My brain was filling in the gaps. Around 2 in the morning, I heard it again. Crunch. Then 3 knocks. Not on the front door, on the wall behind me. I sat up, heart racing, held my breath. 3 more, slower this time. Same wall. Not loud, just deliberate. I didn't get out of bed. I didn't move. I just waited, back against the headboard, eyes locked on the wall across the room. Nothing followed. No footsteps. No more sound. No more sound. I stared out the window until the sky lightened and the trees looked like shadows again instead of shapes. In the daylight, I checked the wall where I'd heard the knocking. Nothing. Not even so much as a scuff mark on the siding. I walked the perimeter again. I even climbed up to the roof with a shaky ladder Caleb kept by the porch. Nothing looked out of place, but when I walked back toward the front, I spotted something new. A long groove in the snow. It ran from the edge of the trees right up to the bottom step of the porch. It wasn't deep, just a smooth depression like someone had slid something heavy and flat across the snow. But what made it worse was that it ended there, right at the step. No prints, no disturbance, no return trail. I tried the satellite radio again. Static. The generator died that afternoon. It didn't sputter, it just cut out. I checked the fuel levels. Plenty left. I pulled the cord a few times, got it to start, but it kept stalling after 30 seconds. Something about the rhythm of it felt wrong, like it didn't want to stay alive. When I rounded the cabin to check the exhaust, I saw the back door was ajar. Maybe 4 inches. I know I locked it. I'd checked all the doors twice before bed. It's just something you do when you're alone out there. Inside, the air was different. Caleb's place usually smells like wood smoke, old coffee, and whatever's been hanging in his drying rack too long. But now it smelled like the ground after rain, like dirt and moss, but heavier. Damp. I locked every window, turned on every light, and kept the rifle Caleb left in arm's reach. I'd never used it before, still don't know how to load it properly. But it felt better having it nearby. The wind was louder that night. Gusts shook the shutters and howled through the eaves, but it wasn't the noise that got to me. It was the silence in between. Those gaps where you could hear your own pulse, like the house itself was listening. Somewhere around 2 in the morning, I saw something at the window, just a shape. Big, hunched. It didn't move. It didn't do anything. Just stood there, a dark figure against the blue-gray of the snow. I blinked. It was closer. I couldn't make out a face. I could barely see anything with the frost on the glass, but I knew it was there, something thick, heavy, just outside the pane. I closed my eyes, counted to 10. When I opened them, the window was empty, but the snow beneath it was pressed flat. like something had leaned there for a long time. I packed my bag before the sun was fully up, threw in the bare essentials, wallet, thermals, flashlight, and got the snowmobile running. I didn't even get a mile before I had to stop. Trees blocked the trail, not just fallen randomly laid over each other. Deliberate, like someone had stacked them to make a barrier, at least 4 trunks thick. I looked at them for a long time. Then I turned back. I barely slept the next 2 nights. I heard things. Muffled footsteps in the attic, soft creaks in the floorboards, and twice what sounded like breathing just outside the bathroom door. I stopped checking. I just stayed put, waited for light. The final night, the air changed. It got heavy, like before a storm when the pressure drops fast. My ears popped. Then every light in the cabin went out at once. Not just the generator, everything. The battery lanterns, the flashlight I left on the table, total dark. And in that dark, the hallway shifted. I don't know how else to explain it. It bent, like the space stretched just long enough for something to move through. I locked myself in the bathroom and sat on the floor until the light came back. By morning, the snow had let up. I didn't even eat. I just grabbed my bag and rode out. I didn't care about the trees. I pushed the snowmobile through what gaps I could, dragging it by hand when I had to. I kept moving until I saw the first plowed road. Caleb picked me up a few hours later. He didn't say much, just gave me a thermos and asked if I got bored. I told him I left early. The truck died maybe 20 minutes after dark, way out past a place called Delmer Hollow. If you've never heard of it, good. It's one of those rural spots that shows up on a map but feels like it shouldn't be real when you get there. Just woods, a handful of mailboxes, and a winding 2-lane road that looks like it was paved in the 70s and then abandoned. I figured I could push through. Then the engine gave out. It sputtered twice, coughed like it was choking, and just stopped. The headlights went with it, like the whole truck decided to call it a night. I turned the key a few times, but all I got was a clicking noise and the slow realization that I was screwed. There was nothing around me but thick forest, buried road, and that sharp, biting cold that seeps into your gums and starts to make your bones ache. I remember sitting there for a few minutes with the engine off, just watching my breath fog up the windshield. I didn't panic, not yet. I just stared out at the snow and thought, okay, figure it out. I knew I'd passed something maybe half a mile back, a small building tucked off the side of the road. I hadn't paid much attention to it at the time, just assumed it was another closed-down roadside stop. But now it was the only thing resembling shelter for miles, so I layered up, grabbed the flashlight I kept in the glove box, and started walking. It was darker than it should have been, the kind of dark that eats the beam of your flashlight after 5 feet. The snow swallowed my steps, and even though I knew the road curved slightly, I kept second-guessing whether I was going the right way. After maybe 10 minutes, I saw it again. A low brick structure, half buried in snow. No lights, no signs, just a shell. The door was wooden, warped from age and moisture. I had to push hard to get it open. It creaked loud enough to make me wince. Inside was about what you'd expect. 2 public restrooms, both missing their doors, a couple of benches bolted into the walls, and a busted vending machine tipped over in the corner. The windows were glazed with frost. The air smelled stale and wet, like rotting leaves and dust. Still, it was 4 walls and a roof. I brushed snow off the nearest bench, sat down, and pulled my coat tight. My hands were already stiff. I rubbed them together while scanning the room. There was a mounted payphone near the back wall, old and definitely dead, but I checked anyway. The receiver was cold as metal. No dial tone, just silence. The first hour was quiet, unsettling, sure, but not terrifying. I was cold, uncomfortable, and annoyed with myself for taking that route. But I wasn't scared. I figured I'd make it through the night and start walking as soon as the sun came up. Then, sometime around 9, I heard the first knock. 3 soft taps on the door. I froze. It wasn't loud, just enough to be unmistakable. I stood up with the flashlight in my hand and called out, "Hello?" No answer. After a minute, I opened the door. just snow and trees. No movement, no sound. The snow had picked up again, and my boot prints from earlier were already halfway filled in. There were no new tracks, nothing. I closed the door slowly and told myself it was snow shifting off the roof, or maybe a tree branch knocking in the wind. The usual excuses. 10 minutes later, it happened again. 3 knocks, same rhythm, just a little louder. This time, I didn't move. I sat on the bench with the flashlight pointed at the door. My heart started to beat a little faster, and I noticed I was gripping the flashlight too tightly. There was no wind, no branches scraping anything. The air was still. It was too quiet for normal explanations. The third time, the knocks came slower, heavier. 3 deliberate thumps, like someone using their fist, but holding back just enough to not break the door. I stood and opened it fast. Nothing. Again. No fresh prints, no shadows. Just a clearing filled with snow and a tree line that suddenly felt way too close. That was the moment it tipped from weird to wrong. I stayed up after that, sitting upright on the bench with my back against the wall, flashlight in my lap. My breath felt too loud. Every creak in the building made me tense. I watched the door and windows until my eyes hurt from not blinking. Around 2 a.m., something shifted in the air. You know that feeling when someone walks into a room behind you? That electric charge across your shoulders? That's what it felt like, except no one was there. The air turned sharper, not just colder metallic, like breathing through a mouthful of keys. Then I heard the boards creak behind the wall where the payphone was mounted. Not footsteps, just a subtle shift, like someone putting their weight down very slowly, trying not to be heard. I stood up as quietly as I could. The sound stopped. I aimed the flashlight at the wall. Nothing moved. I tried to talk myself down. Maybe the cold was messing with the building. Maybe I was hearing pipes or ice cracking somewhere. Then I noticed the coat. It was hanging from a rusted hook on the back wall, one of those heavy gray wool coats, thick and stiff looking. I hadn't seen it before. I would have. I'd checked that whole wall earlier looking for something to wedge the door shut. I walked over and touched it. It was damp. Not frozen, not icy, just damp, like someone had come in from the snow and hung it up not long ago. I backed away and sat back down. I stared at that coat for over an hour. It never moved, never made a sound, but the feeling of not being alone got worse. I started imagining what kind of person would leave a coat like that, why they'd be out here, why it was still wet. I didn't sleep. Not even for a second. Then just before dawn, the door creaked open. It moved on its own, a slow, dragging sound that made every hair on my neck stand up. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. It opened just wide enough for cold air to start pouring in. It was too dark to see more than a few feet ahead. Then I felt it, something behind me shifting again. Just enough to know it was there, not touching me, not breathing, just watching. I turned the flashlight back on, and the coat was gone. The bench I'd been sitting on? It had moved. Not much, just a few inches, but there were drag marks in the dust underneath it. Like something had pulled it back while I was sitting on it. I don't even remember standing up. I just remember the door, the light starting to gray the sky outside, and this deep certainty in my gut that if I stayed one more minute, I wasn't walking out at all. So I left. I was 29 when I picked up the job doing winter supply runs through the Eastern Appalachians. My routes were small, isolated places, community clinics, senior homes, little backwoods aid centers that didn't make it onto regular delivery schedules. I'd drop off canned food, basic meds, winter clothes, things like that. I had an old 4-wheel drive Ford I bought off a guy in Lynchburg who claimed it had personality. What that really meant was the engine coughed in the cold, the radio cut out if you hit a bump wrong, and the left headlight flickered every time I turned right. I didn't mind. I liked being on the move. Driving gave me space to think without actually having to sit still. And back then, sitting still wasn't something I was good at. That particular night, I'd finished a drop near a town called Glen Hollow, just 2 rows of houses. a post office the size of a shed, and a church with no cross. I had maybe 40 miles to my next stop, but I figured I'd pull over and sleep a bit. It was late, around midnight. Snow had started again, that soft, drifting kind that doesn't make a sound but piles up before you realize it. I pulled off along a wide shoulder on Route 31. No streetlights, no houses nearby, just trees and hills and a whole lot of quiet. I parked with the hazard lights on, blinking red every few seconds, and settled into the back of the truck. Nothing fancy, just a sleeping bag, a thermos of coffee I'd refilled at a gas station around 9, and an old green wool blanket I'd taken from my uncle's garage years back. It still smelled faintly like motor oil and dust. There was no cell signal out there. No radio reception either, just the steady click of the hazard lights and the occasional creak from the frame when the wind shifted. Honestly, I wasn't expecting anything except a cold night and maybe a stiff back come morning. I must have dozed off because the next thing I remember is a noise. 3 sharp taps on the driver's side mirror. Not a knock on the window. Not something random. It was precise. Rhythmic. Tap, tap, tap. At first, I didn't even open my eyes. I figured it was ice sliding off the roof or a tree branch dropping snow. That kind of thing happens all the time when you sleep in a parked vehicle in the cold. You learn not to jump at every sound. Then it happened again. 3 knocks. Same tempo. Not frantic or panicked. Just steady. Intentional. I sat up, wiped the condensation off the window with my sleeve, and squinted out through the glass. There, right next to the driver's side mirror, was a kid. Couldn't have been more than 10 years old. She was standing perfectly still, face partially hidden under the hood of a dark sweatshirt. Her hands were tucked into the sleeves, and her body didn't move at all, not even from the cold. I blinked a few times trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Then I turned and looked through the small slider window into the front seat and out the passenger side. Another one, a little taller, standing the same way. Hood up, sleeves covering the hands, just staring. I didn't get it. There hadn't been a single car on that road in hours. No headlights, no tire tracks, and we were far enough from any houses that there was no reason for anyone, let alone 2 kids, to be out there. The one on my side finally spoke. Her voice was weirdly soft, almost monotone. "We need your phone," she said. "Our parents are waiting. Can we come in?" The words came out slowly, like she was trying them on, not scared, not pleading, just saying them. I rubbed the window clear again, leaned closer. The girl on the passenger side was staring straight at me now. Her face was off. It took me a second to realize why. Her skin had a weird bluish tint, not like she was cold, but like something wasn't processing right beneath it. Like the color was just slightly wrong. She hadn't spoken yet. I didn't open the door. I didn't even reach for the handle. I couldn't explain it, but my whole body went still, not tense, just frozen. Like some part of me was screaming, "Don't move." The girl on the other side repeated herself. This time, both of them said it together. "Can we come in? It's cold." "Let us in." Same flat tone, no urgency, no emotion, just words. I hit the lock button. I know how that sounds. 2 kids, probably lost, standing in the snow in the middle of the night, and I locked the door on them. But everything about the situation felt wrong. Like watching a movie where the actors aren't quite human. They were doing the right gestures, saying the right things, but it didn't land. It didn't feel right. The smaller one tapped again. 3 knocks, louder. Then she tilted her head sideways, slow and sharp, like something out of joint. That's when I saw her face fully, and I realized what was missing. Her eyes, or more specifically, the place where her eyes should have been. It wasn't that they were closed or swollen or hidden in shadow. They just weren't there. Smooth skin where the socket should be, like a feature someone forgot to draw. Before I could react, the taller one took a small step back. She made this low sound, kind of like a hum but broken, like a speaker cutting in and out. Then she let out a whistle, short, high-pitched, like she was signaling something. The girl nearest to me dropped to her hands and knees. No sound, no warning, just down. Then she started rocking against the side of the truck, back and forth. Her sleeves scraped along the door panel, her movements getting jerky and fast, like she was glitching. Her mouth hung open, jaw slack, but she didn't make a sound, not a breath, not a grunt. And then, slowly, she began crawling underneath. I snapped out of whatever daze I'd been in, launched myself into the front seat, and turned the key. The truck fired up immediately, which was a miracle in itself. I slammed it into gear and floored the gas. As the wheels started to catch, I felt something brush the undercarriage. It didn't sound like scraping on ice or gravel. It was softer, wet, like something organic dragging against metal. I didn't stop. I didn't check the mirrors. I didn't care what it was. I just drove. 40 miles later, just past a town called Marlin's Ferry, I pulled into the parking lot of a diner I knew opened early. Lights were on. Place looked warm, safe. I walked in shaking, soaked in sweat even though it was freezing. The guy behind the counter didn't ask many questions, just poured coffee and let me use the landline to call my dispatcher. I told him I'd almost hit a deer and needed to check the truck for damage. I waited until daylight before I went back outside. There were handprints on both sides of the cab. Muddy, smeared, streaked from motion, but only on the top half, nothing below the door line. No prints near the tires, no footprints leading away in the snow. I drove different routes after that, stuck to highways, skipped the dirt back roads even if they were shorter, added hours to my day, but I didn't care. No part of me ever wanted to be that far off the grid again, and I don't sleep in the truck anymore. Doesn't matter how late it is. My uncle had this old trail shelter tucked up in the mountains near Lenford, not far from the Kentucky-Virginia line. It used to be part of some busted ski camp that closed down in the 90s way before I ever saw it. He mostly used the place to store gear hunting stuff, salt blocks, busted deer cams he kept saying he'd fix. It was mid-January. Cold enough that your breath stuck to your collar. Once you passed the spillway down at Lake Givens, the cell signal dropped off a cliff. And after a good snow, the road in was gone. The only way up was by snowmobile, which he lent me along with a key to the back bunkhouse. I brought canned soup, powdered coffee, a tiny camp stove, a cot, and 5 paperbacks I pretended I might read. I didn't even bring a watch. I figured I didn't want to know what time it was while I was out there. The first night was quiet, dead quiet. I got the propane heater going, checked the windows, and shoveled some packed snow out of the roof vent so I wouldn't gas myself in my sleep. I kept telling myself I wasn't nervous, just tired. My hands shook a little when I lit the stove, but that was probably the cold, or the divorce, or both. There was a storm coming in a couple days, but I figured I had a decent window before things got messy. I didn't expect to sleep well, and I didn't. But the night passed. It was the second night that changed things. I woke up in the dark, no clue what time it was, just wide awake, like I'd been pulled out of sleep instead of drifting out of it. The propane heater hissed in the corner, ticking softly as it cycled, the kind of sound that fades into the background after a while. My throat was dry as hell, so I sat up to grab my water bottle. That's when I heard the knock. Not on the door, on the wall. One knock, solid, dull, not loud, but too sharp to mistake. Then a pause. Then another one sane, exact sound, almost mechanical in how steady it was. I froze halfway to the water, just holding still, listening. There shouldn't have been anyone out there. The snow was knee-deep at least. No one hikes out that far in winter, and the nearest house was miles away. It was past midnight, or what felt like it. Pitch black. That part of the mountain didn't even get reflected starlight. I didn't hear footsteps, no movement, just those 2 knocks, and then nothing. A few seconds passed. I tried to tell myself it could have been the heater, maybe the ice shifting outside. Old wood does weird things in the cold, but something about the rhythm felt too intentional. I lay back down, but the cot let out this long, slow creak beneath me. Except I hadn't moved yet. It made that sound before I shifted, like someone else had leaned on it first. My whole body went rigid. I didn't even breathe for a moment. I turned my head just enough to scan the room, and I saw something. Over by the door, past the edge of the table, there was a shape, low to the ground. Still, could have been gear, could have been a pack, but it hadn't been there when I lay down. It was too solid, too square, and too short to be a person standing. I didn't move, just stared. Then, finally, I reached for the headlamp I'd clipped to the cot rail, flicked it on. The beam cut through the dark, and there was nothing there. No shape, no movement, no evidence that anything had been there at all. Just my boots, the water jug, my gear, all in the exact spots I'd left them. I told myself maybe I'd misremembered, that my eyes played tricks on me in the dark. But it didn't feel like that. It felt like something had been watching me. I didn't sleep again that night. I sat there in the dark for hours, wide awake, trying to find reasons not to panic. By morning, I had convinced myself it was a dream, or some kind of stress response. I even laughed a little while brushing snow off the roof, like I was being dramatic. Then I went to put on my boots, and both of them were filled, completely filled with snow. Not damp or dusty, packed, solid. I bent down and touched it. Ice cold. The kind that comes from outside, not just melted flakes from a coat. The inside of each boot had been packed tightly, heel to toe. No signs of melting. And the weirdest part, the snow was slightly crusted over, like it had refrozen, as if it had been out in the cold long enough to form a skin before being crammed inside. That's when I stopped pretending. I checked everything. Door was still locked from the inside. Windows were sealed, no tracks, no signs of entry, no drips from the ceiling. I even climbed up onto the counter to check the vent grate in case something or someone had used it to get in. Nothing. That night, I didn't even try to sleep. I killed the heater, didn't want it masking sounds, and sat fully dressed in the chair with a flashlight in my lap. No noise except my own breathing, and the occasional pop of wood shifting as the cold tightened around the shelter. Around 3 in the morning, I saw it. Outside the window, just ahead. Nothing else. No shoulders, no body. Just a round, unmoving shape barely visible above the snowbank. It didn't bob. Didn't shift. It just hovered there. Like someone had sunk themselves into the drift and was watching through the glass. I didn't get up. I didn't want to see more than I already had. I waited. Hours passed. The head never moved. When the sun came up, it was gone. No tracks, no evidence. Just smooth snow. I told myself maybe I'd imagined it, but it didn't feel imagined. It felt like something had come close enough to check me, like it had been waiting to see what I would do. That morning, I packed. I didn't bother folding anything, just shoved it all in the duffel and lashed it down on the snowmobile. I rode slow down the ridge, partly because the slope was icy, partly because I couldn't stop checking over my shoulder. I didn't go home that night. I found a motel off the old highway near Arliss Hollow and booked a room. I was 26 when I signed on for a winter gig up in a place called Larch Hollow. Not a town, just a name on an old trail map, really. Most of their winter field work had been paused because of weather, but for some reason, this particular outpost still needed eyes on site. A bunch of their trail cameras had stopped transmitting, and they wanted someone out there just in case. Could have been weather, battery failure, or more dramatically, poachers or squatters. I was between contracts, and the money wasn't bad. I'd done similar work before, usually boring. Log conditions, monitor equipment, check fuel levels, keep wildlife logs. I figured I'd get some reading done, maybe write, maybe just sit with my thoughts for a while. They flew me into Asheville, then drove me another 5 hours through winding switchbacks into the mountains. The further we went, the less plowed the road got, until eventually we had to switch to a snowcat for the last few miles. That final stretch felt like entering a different world. No tire tracks, no footprints, just trees and deep white. The cabin itself wasn't much. One room, creaky wooden floors, a propane heater that growled more than it warmed, and a generator out back that ran if you treated it nicely. They'd stocked me with propane and fuel for 2 weeks, along with a handheld radio. No internet, no phone signal. Someone would radio in every third day to check on me. Other than that, I was on my own. First night was quiet. I unpacked, tested the heater, noted the generator runtime, and jotted everything down in the little logbook they left behind. Built a fire in the wood stove more for comfort than heat. I remember sitting by it and wondering if I'd made a weird choice. Too much time alone can get in your head. Then around midnight, the floor shifted. Not like a full-on earthquake, more like the whole cabin tilted to one side for a second. A single weird lurch, like someone had leaned their full weight into the wall and then let go. I froze. Waited. Nothing. I stood up, checked outside. Absolutely still. Snow untouched. Trees like statues. That kind of silence that hums in your ears after a while, like your body's trying to fill the emptiness with some sort of internal white noise. Told myself it was nothing. Old cabin. Could have been the wood settling, or maybe a breeze I didn't feel. But something about it didn't sit right. It wasn't the sound. It was the way I felt it, like it started underneath me and moved up through the walls. Second night, I just turned off the lantern when it happened again, this time stronger. The whole place jolted forward hard enough to knock a pan off the wall. It clattered across the floor, and I almost knocked over the lantern reaching for it. The shaking came in a pattern, first to the left, then a hard shove right, and then this weird forward pitch, like something was testing the structure, or learning it. I went outside with the flashlight, walked a slow circle around the cabin. Not a single print in the snow. No fallen branches, no movement, not even rabbit tracks. It was like nothing had touched the land in days. Third night, I didn't bother trying to sleep. I sat on the floor with my boots still on, gloves still on, axe resting across my knees. The fire crackled soft and low, just enough to keep it from dying out. I was dead still, listening. When it happened again, it didn't feel like shaking. It felt like pressure. Every wall, every beam, seemed to press in at the same time for just a moment. Not violently. Just enough to make my spine go tight and my throat close like I was underwater. I felt it in my teeth, in my ribs. I ran out the front door and into the snow, half expecting to catch someone or something in the act. But the clearing was still. The trees across the road hadn't moved. But one of them, just one, was tilted at a different angle. I'd stared at that tree line enough to know it hadn't been like that before. I crossed over to it. Around its base, the snow was messed up. Not footprints, just churned and pressed, like something heavy had crouched there or dragged its weight across it. A wide mess of compressed snow, uneven and wrong. That was the first time I felt a real throb of panic in my chest. Not fear panic, like my body was ahead of my brain. Fourth day, I asked on the radio if anyone had ever reported strange vibrations or tremors at the station. The voice on the other end paused. Then another voice came on. Lower, slower, no introduction. He said, "Don't open the door again if it happens. Just wait it out." And that was it. Static. Static. I called back. Nothing. Fifth night was the worst one. It started earlier than usual. Around 9, I was flipping through an old field guide someone had left behind, Trees of Appalachia or something like that, when the entire cabin pitched. Not subtle this time. Violent. I nearly lost my balance. A metal pot slid off the shelf and dented the wood floor. I went to the window. Something was standing in the trees. Not close. Just far enough that I could only make out the shape. The light from the lantern made it hard to see clearly, but I could tell it wasn't a person. It was hunched forward, like its spine couldn't hold itself upright anymore. Its back arched in this long curve, too long, and its arms hung too low. Narrow shoulders, no coat, no movement. It just stood there while the cabin shifted again, once, then stopped. I turned the lantern off with shaking hands. When I looked again, it was gone. I sat up all night with the axe in my lap and the fire low. Every time the logs popped, I twitched. I didn't sleep a minute. Sixth day, the radio didn't work. No signal. No tone, no static, nothing. I checked the wiring. Unplugged and replugged. It all looked fine. It just wouldn't transmit. Wouldn't even make noise. That night, it didn't shake. Instead, something knocked. Once. On the back wall. Not loud, just a deliberate knock. The kind you do when you're trying to get someone's attention without scaring them. Then it knocked again. On the front door, same thing. One knock. I didn't move, didn't speak, didn't even breathe too loud. It made its way around the cabin. One knock per wall. Like it was counting. I sat still, frozen, while I listened to the soft crunch of snow between each knock. Around 3 in the morning, it started to snow again. Heavy this time. Within an hour, the windows were frosted over and snow had piled against the door. I stayed inside. No more knocking. 7th morning, I went outside just long enough to relieve myself. Snow up to my knees. Still air, but the woods looked off. Several trees had been stripped of bark, clean vertical lines from head height down to the base. Not animal scratches. Too clean. Too deliberate. Each one had deep indentations in the snow beside it, like something had crouched there and stayed perfectly still for a long time. I went back in and didn't step outside again for the rest of the day. Next morning, I heard the snowcat. They weren't due for 3 more days, but I wasn't going to question it. I grabbed my pack, threw it on my shoulder, locked the cabin out of habit, and climbed the ridge to meet them. The driver gave me a nod. No words. I got in. We didn't talk. After that, I never went back. Never even looked at photos of that area again.